Hello, good morning, everyone, and very welcome to this edition of the CyberLife webinar, where we will present a CSIRT story from the trenches. So it's an insider threat case with a twist. So the presentation is about a CSIRT case we handled, as said before, at a healthcare customer, and we will run you through the entire kill chain of what actually happened. And at the end, we'll close with some key takeaways from that story and some things you could potentially be very useful for your own internal organization on how to prepare and tackle these incidents. So who am I? My name is Stefan van Dijk. I am a security architect at Proximus Next. And next to that, I'm also the founder and lead organizer of B-Sides Limburg, which is a security conference in Belgium, where we will discuss many topics like this as well. And I would like to start and kick off this session with a statement, and it could be somewhat a provocative statement. And it's not there to offend anyone, but I'll explain a bit later on how we got to this statement in the first place. So the statement is that toddlers are better at preparing hospital for cyber incidents than most cybersecurity professionals would. I brought some structure to the methodology of proving our statement, and this will also be somewhat the timeline of how the incident happened, what we discovered, and what we learned from. And first of all, we'll start with a bit of background information about the case itself. So, as explained before, it's a customer in the healthcare sector, so it's a hospital. And as you probably may know, hospitals are very well connected to each other because of, for instance, the electronic patient file, which is a central system offered by a large university hospital, and other hospitals use this as a service. Now, given the budgetary issues we face in healthcare in Belgium, we also see that many hospitals are grouping together in order to become more efficient. And from a financial perspective, it makes sense to link these hospitals together. So in the case we will be discussing, it was a major hospital in Belgium that had multiple locations across a specific region. So it is not one hospital we are talking about, but it's actually the entire group we were talking about. So it's a very important detail to bear in mind when we go through the rest of this presentation. Some background information about hospitals that you should know before we deep dive into the discussion. So in hospitals, there are still a lot of legacy systems around, and that is mainly due to the fact that they have a lot of medical equipment. So the medical equipment often uses embedded systems running old operating systems like old versions of Windows or Linux inside those machines. And these are very hard to upgrade and maintain because, first of all, sometimes they are not owned by the hospital themselves, but they lease it from the manufacturer of the medical device. So the manufacturer is also responsible for the update, upgrade, and patch management. That is one of the reasons. Second, many of these systems have a very long lifespan, meaning covering more than 10 or sometimes even 20 years. So it is very expensive to renew these devices, and that's also one of the reasons when there are embedded systems, so computers inside these medical devices, that it's becoming very hard to update and upgrade. Second important thing to know about hospitals is doctors in Belgium are often seen a bit as a freelancer, so they are independent of the hospital themselves, but they rent an office there, and basically they offer their services towards the hospital. But that also means that in many cases they want to use their own tools because they are independent of the hospital themselves. They bring their own computers, they bring their own smartphones into the building, so there is very limited reach that the IT department has control of on those bring your own devices. Third pillar, important to know, and that's actually very interesting in this case, is hospitals are, of course, public places. So that means that everybody can walk in there. So from a physical perspective, protecting a hospital sometimes can become very difficult because everybody can walk into a hospital. And then last part was already briefly discussed. We really see a lot of collaboration with hospitals, but it also means that a lot of IT systems become a lot more integrated, which increases, of course, the risk and the scope and the attack surface of these medical centers. For this particular customer, this is actually the first time we ever had it. We were in contact with the customer months before the incident that we will discuss during this presentation. We did an intake and a tabletop exercise to see how prepared they are in case of a big cybersecurity incident. And for that, myself and some colleagues have created an incident response framework that we offer as a service towards customers. And basically, it's a blueprint on how to tackle a large-scale incident like ransomware. That was the exercise we did with the customer. So the incident response framework touches a lot of topics. So first of all, it has some general information about the company we are working with. So what sector are they in? Who are the points of contact? Are there subsidiaries? Are there affiliates we need to take into account? What does the organization chart look like? And are there any business crown jewels that need to be protected? So we gather that information in the incident response framework and hand it over to you as a customer. Now, why is that important? When we see large-scale incidents like ransomware attacks, you start noticing that you get the same questions from 50 different people. And the management team and the people actually handling the incidents, they really get tired of answering the same question over and over again. So having this preparation playbook done upfront will save you a lot of time in the incident, and later on we will prove it as well with this particular incident, how helpful it can be to have all that information consolidated at one place. Second thing so here we already had the general information. It was a healthcare customer and a group of healthcare providers. Then the second step in the IRP framework, when we have all the general business information of the customer, there we will look at some IT general information. What does the server park look like? What's the network architecture? How is the naming convention being done? And that turns out to be very useful with handling the incident, actually, because our CSIRT team, once they got involved, they had all this information at hand and they didn't need to ask the customer each and every time they saw something. So one of the biggest frustrations we see in incident handling when our CSIRT team or CCB is involved is, for instance, there is an incident happening on a machine. Okay, what does that machine do? So having that information upfront is very useful and saves a lot of time in an actual crisis situation. Then we also look at, are the networks connected with each other? And in this particular case, they were actually in a merger between two different groups as well. So the network was connected already, but there were different maturity levels, meaning that at one side of the healthcare company, they used vendor X. At the other side, they used vendor Y. At one side, they had high maturity, the other side had a lower maturity. So this mismatch in communication, and it is very, it cannot be avoided when you are merging two companies together, but it is something to look at up front as well. And here we actually had the luxury of doing this exercise up front so that we had the information at hand. But also some general other stuff. What tools do you use? Are there training tools? Who are your security partners? So to have that in one place. Now, in this particular case, the customer had backups in place. They were quite solid, actually, and they used a best-of-breed approach. That meant that for their tooling perspective, they always chose the best vendor in that particular area where they were looking for a partner. So they had all the top-notch security tools in-house at that moment. There are also other things we look at in the incident response preparation track, and that is, for instance, will you pay? Will you negotiate? So that's also useful information to have up front so that you do not waste any time in decision making when the actual incident is going on. Is there communication available at hand? Do you have communication templates? Because I'll give you an example, a true world example of a ransomware attack where we were involved. So it happened at 5 o'clock at night. We were the first ones to be called at 5:30 in the morning. And before 7 o'clock, we already had the first journalists on the line to ask what was happening in this particular case, although the customer in that particular case was not open yet. So that information towards the world spreads very fast, even when you are not in control. So that's why having these communication templates up front would be very nice and very helpful. Are there DRP and BCP plans? Now, in this particular customer, they have a lot of crisis experience because they are a hospital, of course. So from a medical perspective, they were very well prepared in terms of handling crises and big incidents. So that was definitely a plus, but they lacked a bit of maturity on the IT side, and that's where we helped them in that case. Now, so we did the exercise with the customer, we delivered them the report, we delivered them the incident response framework with all the documented information, and they are a CSIRT customer of Proximus, meaning that once there is an incident, they can contact us and the CSIRT team will be involved. Now, 4 weeks later, so 4 weeks after the preparation exercise, we got a call on Friday because, of course, that's when all cybersecurity incidents happen, Fridays and during the weekend, from that same customer. And they said, we see suspicious network traffic and we would like to use our CSIRT contract. Now, they already contacted CCB, but back then they were occupied with a few other large incidents at that moment. So that's the reason why our CSIRT team got involved as of the first minute, together with myself and together with another colleague who helped me with the exercise to jump in and start our investigation. So just for a time frame reference, we got the call at, I think, 12:30, so it was close to noon on that Friday. So my colleagues, we arrived at the customer. So first observations we took was there was no internet-facing assets or nothing we could really find that had a critical vulnerability that could have been abused. So that was one of the first things we saw. That was probably it will not be the exploit of a vulnerability from the outside. Second thing we started looking at was, were there suspicious emails that someone clicked upon, and also that we were quite fast to rule out. So it didn't seem to be a phishing attack. But one thing we did notice was the network traffic was coming from inside the hospital themselves. So that was a first strange thing to notice, to be honest, because we have seen it before, but it doesn't happen that often. So I explained earlier, anybody can walk into a hospital, so you can see it as a public space. So it's not completely surprising, but again, an attack from inside the hospital was not something very common. So one of the first proposals was, can we figure out exactly where, so the physical location of the network port, to see if we can investigate CCTV footage to see what was going on there. One of the first tools we start investigating is the EDR, or Endpoint Detection and Response solution, because that will give you a general overview of what is going on. And one of the first observations we did there, and now it becomes a bit more technical, so bear with me, please. But one of the things we saw was the exfiltration of the certificates, which indicates domain admin privileges and also persistence. This is a very dangerous trigger. That means that the attacker has top-level privileges within the environment. But then something strange, and I don't know if there are any offensive security people in the call, but so the first thing we saw was he was domain admin. A second thing we saw was he was phishing again for credentials and basically running discovery attacks again. Now, from an attacker perspective, why would you do that if you already have the keys to the castle, basically? So one of the first working theories we had was that we were facing two attackers that were in the same network without knowing that they were there. So basically two attacks simultaneously going on. A few other observations we did was the attacker seemed to create some data archives of certain data, and that was exfiltrated. So data exfiltration, domain admin privileges, then it becomes very scary, and then the incident could take certain directions. We also noticed that we could trace back the activity of ongoing activity, at least, to the attack for 4 to 5 weeks. Now, why the 4 to 5 weeks? That was the amount of logs that was available at the customer side. So we couldn't go back much further than those 5 weeks, which for a cybersecurity team, it's very difficult to pinpoint what is going on if you only have limited amount of information about an attack. Now, in the last attacks we see that the time frame from entering a customer network to actually doing something as an attacker becomes shorter and shorter. So the 6 months before launching an attack is getting a bit more rare, but in this case, this is what we had to work with. So the 4 or 5 weeks was there. And here we already hit like a first road bump or something we started noticing. So I explained before, the customer had a best of breed approach. That meant that they had different technologies for all different point solutions, and there was no coherence, or the logs were not available at one particular place where we could start our investigation. And this was seriously slowing us down a bit in the investigation phase, because we needed so many people within the organization to continue our investigation. Now, as said before, so we saw the data exfiltration, and usually this only means one thing, and that is someone is preparing for a ransomware attack. So that's what we were preparing for, and that's where we also informed the customer. So from a time frame perspective, we were now at 6 o'clock on Friday night. So give or take, it took us 3.5 hours to do our investigation. And basically, this was somewhat the conclusion. So we told the customer we recommend disconnecting the hospital from the internet, to which the customer replied, sure. But this will have some very big implications, meaning we need to close our ER services, and we also need to postpone all planned surgeries. So yeah, it would have a huge impact, given the fact that it was such a big chain of hospitals. They had to call the national crisis. So they had to announce a national crisis before doing that, but they said if that's the recommendation and you are truly sure we are potentially facing a ransomware attack, we'll probably go for it, because the impact of a ransomware attack would be even bigger. So that was what we discussed with them. Now the customer said, okay, we will activate our crisis mode. So they brought together the entire management of the hospital, and based on our recommendation, they also started looking at the CCTV, so at the camera footage of what was going on actually. And they said, give us an hour, we will then arrive again, we'll meet again to make a decision. Now, this entire investigation has been ongoing remotely, so we were not present at the customer, but it was basically our goal to go on site as of the meeting of 7 o'clock to continue in crisis mode. Now, as said before, it was on a Friday afternoon. It was right before a long weekend. I had my entire holiday schedule planned that weekend. So we left already for holiday, but I told my wife, when it goes south, you can drop me off at the customer and I will join you probably later that weekend. But at 7 o'clock, we arrived in the call again, and the customer said, okay, the case can be closed. We found the threat actor, and we actually already had a meeting with HR about to fire him. So it was an internal employee. Something the customer also explained to us is upfront before they called us and they called CCB, so they had to notify CCB as well about the incident. They called us, they asked the person, is it you? Because they already had some suspicion that he was doing some funky stuff, and he said no. So he completely denied that it was him. But the CCTV footage showed out basically it was him, and all the puzzle pieces fell together. So it was a system administrator within the hospital who was trying to prove a point. Now, at 8 o'clock, he was fired on the spot, basically, and the person drove home on his bicycle, and he got involved in a car accident, and he actually was brought back to the hospital where he was just fired. So he had to stay there for a couple of days, actually, to get medical care. That's also a bit the reason why we call this a insider threat case with a twist, because karma can hit you very bad, apparently. So yeah, this person, and this is of course very hypothetically speaking, yeah, but let's say the ER would have been closed and he still drove home and got involved in that accident. It would actually be the first person that I am aware of who would be victim of his own cyber attack, basically. So then they had to reroute into a different hospital. Now, there are a few things particular about this case that we figured out later. So a couple weeks later, we saw the notification on, I think it was on Instagram, that they were looking for a new employee to hire. And that's when we reached out to the customer again to get the full story about what happened. So there are a few things particular about this person. So the hospital found out, that it was not the first time this person ever did this trick. So at his previous employer, he was fired for exactly the same reason as well. They also figured out he cut out the NFC chip from his badge and implanted it in his hand. So just to show you how far people go sometimes in their role. His official explanation was that he was trying to prove a point on how vulnerable the hospital was in certain places, and it was well known amongst the IT people at the hospital as well. But we can still call it malicious intent, because when they confronted him with it, he still said, no, it's not me. And then later, we proved that it was actually him. So this is mainly the reason why we, coming back to the statement earlier, why toddlers are better at preparing hospitals. The reason they caught him was on the CCTV footage, so on the video from the cameras, basically. And the reason why the hospital is so good at investigating CCTV is because a lot of toddlers get lost in the hospital, or elderly people get lost in the hospital. So they have a lot of experience with quickly analyzing those images and figuring out physical locations within the hospital. So that's why we made the statement earlier. So a few lessons learned from this case and that you can take away to your own organization is, first of all, and maybe a very important one, centralize your security tools or make them at least available from a central point. Now, our entire investigation took like 4 hours. The only reason why it is that fast is because, first of all, we knew the environment and we did the incident response intake. It really cut time a lot, but it could have been a lot faster if they had the security tools all centralized in one place, and if we had access to more data, so longer than the 4 or 5 weeks period, that would help a lot as well. A second important thing to consider was the main reason why this attack was still possible was because they were integrating the networks. So the network maturity levels was not at the same level at both organizations. So when you connect to your network or you need to provide access externally to a partner or to a supplier, really consider the security part when simply making that connection. So that's a very important point. A third key takeaway, background checks. When you hire someone that is involved in having access to sensitive systems or to sensitive data, do some background checks, get some references, call those references actually to see whether this person is legitimate or not. I'm not going to say they would have avoided the entire incident by doing this, but potentially if they reached out to a former employer, they could have figured out it was not the first time the person did this kind of activity. A fourth key takeaway is don't overthink, just walk in or just do it. We see this a lot with a lot of incident cases we work on, is that we feel that customers sometimes have a bit of paralysis by analysis, meaning they are trying to create the best security architecture as possible to look at the best tools to help them with. And actually, usually when we work on ransomware cases, it's almost never about the lack of tools. It's almost never about the lack of resources, but it's simply not fixing the basic stuff. So sometimes it's better to just do and go for something, even if it's not the best security tool on the market, but a somewhat okay tool, well implemented, is sometimes better than not having anything at all. So that's a fourth takeaway. Yeah, fifth one, humans lie. So they confronted him up front. So always make sure to check and sometimes even double check when we are discussing sensitive information. So in this case, we were able to prove basically the person was lying. So zero trust as well with humans is never a bad idea. And then last and definitely not least, the preparation exercise we did with this customer. It's very hard to point a number to it, but I would say at least 50% efficiency was gained in solving the issue because they had done the proper preparation. They had all the information at hand. It helped the investigation a lot, and that's the reason why we were able to, from start call to closing it in half a day in a actual incident case. It's something that is very difficult to achieve when you are not prepared. So that was the last takeaway. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a very pleasant day.
Proximus next? Think possible.